was cleaning toilets. I had clients here in Modi'in. I came from Jerusalem, and I cleaned toilets for friends of mine, for family friends, friends of mine. I think people have to realize two things. No matter how much they plan, it's still an unknown, right? You are different than everybody else. The average figures don't apply to you, specifically with making Aliyah. You might have special circumstances, whatever it is. There are advantages of coming here. They might make a little bit less, but tuition is nothing. I mean, it's a joke. I know people here complain. Right. They complain, but they have nothing to complain about. You have to figure out sort of, again, without getting to the to the nearest shekel, but really how much it is you're going to spend. Before you come, you should really sort of plan and figure out in your area of expertise, if that's what you're going to continue to be. The economy is fine. Okay, is it perfect? No. Could be better? Yes. Are there things changed? Yes. But are we okay right now? Is there any time of economic collapse? No. That's natural. Life goes on, right? We can't just, we cry and we're in pain and we pray for the hostages and we pray for speedy recoveries for all the soldiers who were injured, and we pray for a victory in the war, right? But we also go on with our lives, right? And there's no choice. We have to go on with our lives.
Hi, and welcome to the Dayna Show, where we discuss in English day-to-day life of Israeli citizens, our concerns and aspirations for the country, and everything in between. I'm your host, Dayna Kaplan, and we're so glad that you could join us. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to the podcast, to the Dayna Show, where we highlight amazing people in Israel and the amazing things that they do. And I usually start off mentioning the hostages, that we still have 58 hostages, and we think about them every day. On that note, today we have a really exciting guest, for me anyways. We haven't seen each other in a really long time. Financial expert, CEO of Lighthouse Capital in Yerushalayim, investment firm. You're an author, a columnist, you have your own podcast. Welcome to the show, Aaron Katsman, with an S.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be here. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a really long time. A couple of reasons why I really wanted to have you on the show. First being that this is my 32nd podcast.
Wow.
And every single guest that comes in has a different opinion on whether you could make it in Israel or not. Some say you could be even more wealthy here than you can be in Chutz La'aretz. Some say less. And also another reason that I wanted to have you on was because of what's going on in the rest of the world in Chutz La'aretz. And a lot of Jews are contemplating making Aliyah. And I think a big issue for them is, are they going to be able to live at the same standard of living as they have there? And I want to go through that with you. I actually decided that if it's okay with you, to go through different standards of living or different places in people's lives and how they can make the crossover to living in Israel.
Okay.
But because this podcast is more about the person and what they do, I really wanted to get your background. When you made Aliyah, what was the impetus for you to make Aliyah? What was your Jewish education like before? So please, Aaron.
Okay. Well, that's a lot. Take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath.
So I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and I came to Israel, I guess the first time I was ever in Israel, actually, was my first year when I came to learn in yeshiva. And then I went back, I got my degree from Yeshiva University, and then I came back to Israel and I learned some more, and then I went into the army.
Oh, yeah,
and then I did the army, yeah, and I was in Givati. Yay Givati, Hala Mamshichim, as they say. They sing. I won't sing. I'm going to lose the viewers and the listeners right at the beginning. That's not a good policy. And I said to myself that if I could get a job here, that I would stay. And I sent out like two resumes, basically offering myself to do a free internship for somebody.
What was your degree in?
Political science.
Okay.
Nothing, I could drive. I was qualified to drive a cab, basically, kind of thing. And somebody took me up on it, and they brought me in, and 6 weeks later they offered me a position. And sort of the rest is history. I stayed in Israel. And I've been here now for almost 33. Wow. Almost 33 years. That's a long time.
Has it been fun?
When you're 32, 33 years is a long time. Yeah. It's fun. It comes with its challenges. I don't think I wake up every morning and say, wow, I'm living in Israel, or wow, I'm walking the streets of Jerusalem and I'm living the Zionist dream for the last 2,000 years. Oftentimes there are special instances that happen. You take a step back and go like, wow, this is unbelievable. But, I think it's like most people, where you get up in the morning and you do your thing and you go to work, and, it's sort of a life. And you happen to be living your life here in
Did you
Israel.
grow up in a Zionist kind of family? Was Israel like a topic?
So that's a great question. It wasn't rah-rah. It was definitely not rah-rah Zionism and rah-rah, you got to go to Israel. I never came to Israel, right? It wasn't like my family. We came in summers to visit Israel. I was happy, playing baseball and tennis and living by the beach in Seattle and doing my own thing and loving the outdoors and fishing. But we did come from a house where, by example, I think, our parents sort of set an example that you have to do what's right. And I guess that ultimately, I felt that living in Israel was the right place to be, and that's the right thing to do. And sort of fascinating that all five of us from Seattle, right, ended up live in Israel. So that's pretty cool.
Because of that.
I guess there was nothing like, it wasn't like, we had Israeli flags and we were, pro-Israel. My mother of blessed memory used to say, God bless Menachem Begin. Whenever he did anything, she loved Menachem Begin. But it wasn't like we learned, it wasn't, there was no B'nai Akiva in Seattle. It was nothing like that. It was just sort of, they instilled in us that you always have to do what's right. And I guess each of one of us on our own ended up making that decision and coming here, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And how has it been for you here? Like, let me rephrase that. What were the challenges that you had when you, I guess, first got here? You were young, right?
Yeah, I was young. I didn't know any better, right? So I guess that comes like everything in life. It's pluses and minuses, right? The advantage for me was that I didn't know any better, right? And that I didn't, have to reinvent myself, because I hadn't invented myself yet. When I came here and I did the army and I learned, but then, okay, you're 25 and you're starting life. So, everything was open to me. Everything was open to me and nothing was open to me, right? So you sort of make your way. And I think the biggest challenge was sort of getting your foot in the door. So I sort of did it in the Anglo world, which is what a lot of people then were doing. Everybody had their own little high-tech company that they all worked at, in Jerusalem. And I didn't, right? Went a different path. But it was interesting that I always felt that it was hard to make the jumps, the career jumps were almost always sideways. It was hard to jump higher. It was sort of doing something different, but within the same level, and not always getting more and more and more responsibility. To me, that was like a big challenge outside of the language and, and just being a foreigner, not having the network and what have you. But in terms of career, I thought that was the biggest challenge. I think it's a lot easier today in the world of social media and WhatsApp. And, there's so many more networking you have more capability networking and friends, and you can just reach out. You can get to the whole world, with a click. And back then, there were no Facebook groups. There was no nothing, right? You picked up a phone and you called somebody. You actually had to speak to somebody, which was an advantage. But, you had to spend a lot more effort trying to get somewhere than you do today. That's what I think.
When I moved here, I was 23. And also, it's coming on 30 years. And I remember the no internet issue, and I had to do everything by foot. I mean, I moved here when I was pregnant, and my ex-husband started working right away, and I had to take buses everywhere, and it was really, really difficult. I think from that perspective, the people who make Aliyah now, it's a lot easier for them. But back then, it was definitely a challenge. You really, really had to want to live here, in my opinion. Although, another reason that I wanted to talk to you was because when I moved here, a friend of mine who was like the Rosh Moshe in Camp Moshava, who was like a huge Zionist, he did walk around with the flag. He left because he couldn't make it financially here. So that's something that I wanted to talk to you about, because that's also a common theme. And I'm wondering if it's gotten better, if less people are leaving, or they're, or it's the same.
That's really interesting because I had a very similar experience. I remember once, um, I guess on business, I had to go to New York, and I went out to dinner with all my friends. And the funniest thing is that those friends we all sort of lived together in Jerusalem, in Katsman. We all lived together. We were all friendly. And I think we were like 10, 11 people at the table. And the only person who didn't have a Teudat Zahut, I hadn't made Aliyah yet. I was working here on a work permits, whatever. The only one who didn't have a Teudat Zahut at that table was me. Everybody had moved back to the tri-state area, and I was the only one here. And it was inevitably because of work. They couldn't find their job. They couldn't, career-wise, it was a big issue for them. They couldn't do what they wanted to do, and that was a big sort of stumbling block for a lot of people. And whether that's the case today, look, I know the numbers, right? For full disclosure, my wife is head of communications at Nefesh B'Nefesh.
Oh.
So, they have a 90+% retention rate of new olim who come, right? So pretty much everybody who's coming is staying. But I know it's hard, for certain people, it's definitely hard. And it's hard if you have a career, or if you come with a family and you have a career. It's not simple, right? No matter,
Right.
It's just not simple picking up and leaving. And, on the one hand, Israel's sort of known for reinventing. People can reinvent themselves. They can go into completely different career paths. On the other hand, that's not such an easy thing, right? For a lot of people, they don't have the personality for that, or they've been very accomplished in their career, and just to leave it is not such an easy thing to do.
No, but I think that people maybe now they're able to be a little bit more prepared when they come here. Before, I think people were just coming for a Zionist dream, and they were just willing to take a chance, and but now I think people are way more organized with their finances when they come here. Do you think that's
Yeah, there's so many resources for
right?
people to be able to plan. Back in the day, some people took a pilot trip. Yeah, but I came. I didn't even come to stay here, right? Again, I wasn't really at the beginning. I wasn't rah-rah Zionist either. I came because I wanted to learn, and then I went into the army, not because I thought that I went to the army because I thought that as back then, as a good athlete and somebody who could handle the army, I owed it to the Jewish people. It was much broader. It had nothing to do with defending the state of Israel. It had to do with sort of defending the Jewish people on a much more macro scale, let's say, global scale. And it wasn't until I started working here that I sort of, started to get the bug. But there was no planning, there was nobody sat down thinking, oh, you should have a budget. And, this is what the average OLS spends when they live in Buchman or they live in Efrat. I mean, there's nothing left. We've come a long, long way. I think Aliyah, in terms of that kind of thing, is far easier than it ever was. I'm not talking about, toilet paper and Cheerios, right? I'm not talking about any of that kind of stuff. You don't have to bring stuff in anymore. It's all here, right? You have to bring duffel bags of stuff, right?
I used to go to the pharmacy and get the medications and all the creams, and now I'm like, who cares?
You don't need it. It's all here.
It's all
But
here.
90% of it is here, right?
Come here. Oh, you asked me for sucralose before.
Right.
Do you know that when I moved here, there was hardly any sugar-free products here. There was no section even
There
for
was nothing,
sugar-free.
right? Yeah. It's really funny.
Yeah.
So, that has made it, it's 1,000 times easier today in terms of that. Picking up and leaving, where you grew up, and leaving your friends and family, I think that's something that's always going to be. We learn. I don't want to start preachy, right? But we learn from the beginning of history, right? With Abraham, he's commanded to go to Israel, and God gives him 3 words, and there's all kinds of commentators, but without getting too much into it, it's not easy to leave your family and the place you grew up and the place your culture. It's a very, very difficult thing, and that's something that hasn't changed. In 5,000 years, that hasn't changed, and I think that'll always be. As long as we're all human and we have emotions, that's something which you can't overcome, right?
Unfortunately, though, I have this feeling, and maybe it's just because I'm in this doomsday kind of mode since the war started. I feel like Jews might I'm worried that they might have to come here out of necessity and not because of the desire to live in Israel just as a Zionist. And that's what really scares me. And that's another reason why I wanted to bring you here, because I know that there's a lot of people that I've spoken to personally who are worried, especially in Canada right now. It's really, really bad. People can't walk around with them again. David, they're nervous. And if God forbid there comes a time where people are going to have to make an exodus, like I want them to try to be as prepared, at least to have some kind of idea of how to get their finances in order before they come here.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any tips for people
There's a lot
who
of
want
tips.
to do?
Yeah.
But basic things, because I know you're.
First of all, you have to realize, I think people have to realize two things. The first thing they have to realize is no matter how much they plan, it's still an unknown, right? You are different than everybody else. The average figures don't apply to you, specifically who's making Aliyah. You might have special circumstances, whatever it is. And you have to be, on the one hand, open, meaning that you have to realize you're not living in Montreal, or you're not living in Seattle, or you're not living in Woodmere, right? You're now living somewhere in Israel. And you can't, if you live the rest of your life after you make Aliyah, comparing to what it was like there, or, I had this, that, and that there, it's going to be much, much harder for you to have a successful Aliyah. You just have to forget it, right? And you have to, with open arms, sort of embrace your new reality of living in Israel. Practical tips are, it does pay. There are resources out there where you can find out sort of on average what people spend. I mean, that's the first thing, but you really have to talk to friends. Most people have friends here, have relatives here. If they don't, there's 2 degrees of separation. They can find people, and they really should research, right? Somebody who's sort of similar to you, if you're single or if you're family, the kids, the profession, because you want to make as an educated decision as you can. You're not going to exactly know how much money you're going to need, but the more information you have, obviously, the closer you're going to get to whatever that magic number is for you. So number one is you have to figure out sort of, again, without getting to the to the nearest shekel, but really how much it is you're going to spend. And then you have to figure out what your job is going to be, right? If you're commuting and you keep your job in North America or in Europe, okay, so if not, then before you come, you should really sort of plan and figure out in your area of expertise, if that's what you're going to continue to be.
Can I
what are
interrupt you for a
average
second?
salaries? Yeah, sure.
Let's say you're a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And you have an established practice. You're a mumcha. You're a what's the mumcha name?
Expert.
Expert. You're not going to make the same amount of money here that you do there. So how do you make that? How do you come to terms with that?
So, first of all, there are doctors who go back, who commute, right? So they do make similar salaries. But let's say you don't. Doctors are really interesting because doctors, on the one hand, make more money. On the other hand, I know at least in America, I'm not exactly sure in Canada, but I assume it's the same. Their expenses are much, much higher. Right? People who have bigger salaries, if they have families, are paying full tuition.
Right.
Right. Nobody's getting scholarships. They're paying full board.
Right.
Right. I know. I have clients, acquaintances who live like in Florida, which is, they live in Florida, and they're doctors, and they do really, really well. I mean, really, really well. Between well into the 6 digits, almost into the 7 digits every year, and they're able to bank, maybe $50,000 a year, maybe $100,000 a year, because when you're done with taxes and when you get done with tuitions, they have 4 or 5 kids. And nobody's giving me a scholarship. And when you get done with everything else and the insurance that they have to pay and all this kind of stuff, it's not like they're saving everything that they're making. So there are advantages of coming here. They might make a little bit less, but, tuition is nothing. I mean, it's a joke. I know people here complain. Right. They complain, but they have nothing to complain about. I mean, compared to what they're paying in North America, it's a joke. And a lot of stuff, healthcare, all this kind of stuff here, doesn't cost very much. So at the end of the day, you can almost be, I'm not going to say you're going to be in the exact same situation, but you can be pretty successful financially, even if you have a lower salary, because the cost of living on certain things, on certain big ticket items, isn't as much.
I spoke to my friend Isaac, who he and his family made Aliyah about 6 months ago from Canada, and he made that interesting point as well. And he said that he paid tuition the year before for 4 kids in high school, $80,000. And he's like, here, it's borscht. It's hardly anything. And he said another thing in Canada, I mean, and I guess in the United States as well, people invest a lot of money in their homes, in furnishing their homes and just sustaining their home with electricity or whatever it is. Here, we spend more time outside. We're not in our homes. I mean, now, I mean, since Corona and the war, it's a little bit different, but still, we have nice homes. Most of the people I know have, decent homes, but they spend more time outside, so they don't furnish as much as they do back there. And those are two really big expenses that people have that they won't have here. Are there any other things like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, and we're used to the water damage, so we don't keep spending money on every place. That's just a tip for all of you thinking of making Aliyah, you're going to have water damage. So when you start seeing those little stains on the walls, you know what it's from, and just let it go. So that's cost of doing business in Israel.
That's a very good point.
There are things which are certainly more expensive, cars and gas and all that kind of stuff. But depending on where you are, a lot of people here aren't necessarily two-car families. You can do well with one. If you're living on a yishuv or somewhere where there are a lot of people like you, there's rideshare possibilities, or you don't really need to there are people who live on a yishuv and don't ever leave their yishuv. Those of us who live in cities, and you might have to transport kids to different extracurricular activities, so it's a little bit more difficult. But Israel's definitely getting better, right? The whole public transportation thing with the trains. I mean, the 33 years that I'm here, it's just, you cannot believe the difference in public transportation. Now, there's a long way to go, but nothing's perfect. But
I
there are people who
prefer
are just, yeah.
I prefer it. I mean, I own a car, and it's not even a really amazing car. It was super, super expensive. That's another thing that people have to consider. The cars here are crazy. But in the last 6 months, I love taking public transportation. I sit on the train and I see everyone sitting in the pkakim, and I just wave to them, and I'm like, there's no alternative. It's the best. It's really the best.
So those are things, that are getting better.
Right.
What else? Property. The fact of the matter is the cost of property is expensive, but if you're coming and you're already a homeowner in many Jewish communities in North America, I don't think that you're going to have to, based on sort of average house prices, it's not going to be so much more money to buy here. I know that sounds crazy because you're coming from a house with, 15 bedrooms and a big backyard, and here you can buy an apartment or whatever for the same amount of money. But okay, that's what we spoke about at the beginning, right? You have to sort of change your expectations and realize you're just moving to a new place. That's just the way that it works. So you might not get the same space or whatever, but it's not going to necessarily cost you anymore in terms of sort of housing. So that's something else to keep. A lot of people get intimidated. But at the end of the day, I haven't found, right? And somebody's going to write in, right? And say, oh, he's an idiot. What's he talking about, right? I had to pay $500,000 more for whatever. But from what I've seen, and I've speak to a lot of people and I counsel a lot of people, there's not such a huge difference. And that's obviously going to be your biggest cost, is housing and what have you. And it's not such a difference. It's pretty similar. So that's another reason to be optimistic, I think, is that you can, again, you might not get the same space, but you'll still have a roof over yourself, except for the water damage, as we noted before.
Can we go through 3 different types of people who would move here, and maybe we can give a couple of concerns that they might have, and then solutions? Let's say, for example, a 25-year-old kid who just got their degree and wants to move here and is worried about their finances. Their concerns would probably be, what kind of job do I get with my degree? What is rent here going to be like? What is the cost of living? So how does someone in that situation organize himself as much as possible to be in a good place when he moves.
So the advantage of somebody who's 25 coming and they don't have any, they're not locked into anything, right? They're I assume you're speaking about a single person who's coming.
Yes, a single person.
So, what's really easy for them is that, they can live cheap, at least at the beginning, right? They can live with roommates. They don't have to have their own apartment. They can move in with a few people. It's not going to cost them very much, right? It might cost them, if you want to, in shekel terms, rent plus, some food plus some utilities, you can get by on probably 5,000 shekels a month, 6,000 shekels a month. Why is that good? Because until you find your job, until you really sort of find your niche, you can pretty much do anything and you'll make more or less that salary, right? You can even, you can work in a supermarket or you can deliver pizzas and you're going to be in that ballpark. You can make it work if you want it to work. And that's something I want to make a point to. I had a call with somebody literally last week, and this person had some student loan debt. She was going on and on and on that she's 27 and she has a degree from wherever, and she hasn't found her footing here yet, and she sort of bounced around. She's waiting for the perfect job. Meanwhile, she had some savings, which she's just blowing through. And I said, well, until you get the perfect job, why do you refuse to work, right? Why don't you just, like I said, there's signs everywhere. You can find a job. Do anything. You can always find a job in a clothes shop or in a supermarket, right? I know it's not what you dreamed of when you were in Harvard. That's not where the person went. But okay, you got to start somewhere. And she was just refusing. She was, all my friends are buying property. And I said, first of all, they're not buying property at 20. They're not all buying property at 27, okay? Second of all, you can sit and cry all you want, but you could be also in New York or you can be in Toronto. And if you're going to hold out all the time for your dream job, you're not going to get anywhere. That's sort of a universal principle. It has nothing to do with Aliyah, right? If you're not willing to sort of hit the ground and hit the pavement and work hard, certainly at the beginning, I don't think you're going to get anywhere. That's just my own personal thing. And as a personal story, when I came here, so I was between jobs and I had to pay the rent and I had to eat. And I wasn't going to ask my parents were going to say, if you can't make it, that's your, come back to America and get a job or whatever, do whatever you got to do. And I was cleaning toilets. I had clients here in Modi'in. I came from Jerusalem and I cleaned toilets for friends of mine, for family friends, friends of mine. You know what? Okay, it was lo na'im, as they say. It wasn't like, it wasn't comfortable, but we're still friends to this day. And they got a clean house. And I was able to pay the rent and eat, And sometimes people need a little bit of a slap in the face and that push. They really, you can do it. If you come here at 25, there's no reason, I would say, for you not to be successful, right? It might take a little bit of time. It's not going to be, you're not going to hit your dream job, right? Maybe you will, but, you bounce around a little bit, but you contact people and you sort of have a goal and you sort of shoot for it and you'll get close to it, right? But it shouldn't be reason. I don't think somebody who's 25, finances should be the reason that they can't make it here. I mean, it might sound cruel, but you can make it work financially. Right?
Do you think that there's a difference between the Israeli and the North American perspective on making it in Israel? Because most Israelis that I speak to, they say it's so hard here. It's so hard. And they dafka have to have more than one job. A lot of people I know have more than one job to make ends meet. And then you have people who are from North America, and they're like, you can absolutely make it here. You can be even more wealthy than you were in Chutz La'aretz. There seems to be like a little bit of a dissonance between the two perspectives.
Yeah. And I'll tell you even more than that. One of my jobs when I was sort of going sideways, climbing a little bit, but more going sideways, I was in an international bank working here. And, everybody, there might have been, 3 Anglos maybe in the whole bank. And everybody would ask me, why, we all want to go abroad for the bank. Yeah. We don't want to stay here. We're using this as a stepping stone. They took advantage of people. They paid lower salaries. They knew that everybody wanted to work for them. So eventually, they could send them to Europe or the US. Why do you want to be here? Right. So there's already that, that's not financial, but that's already sort of a certain mindset amongst some of the Israelis. Why would you want to come here in the first place? Right. It's better. Right. The grass is always greener on the other side. Yeah, I think that look, for people who want to come here, ultimately they're coming here for a reason.
Right.
They're not coming here because, oh, like, I guess even for me deep down, I joke about it, right? But I knew I was coming here because I felt that ultimately this was the right place to be. And I think pretty much everybody who comes here is driven by, not wild Zionist ideals, but they want to be in Israel because they think it's the future of the Jewish people, or whatever cliche, but there's a lot of truth to those cliches, obviously. Whereas somebody who comes, who grows up here, I don't think they have that same appreciation.
They don't.
Right? It's just, for them, it's another place, right? It's just another place. They don't appreciate the fact, and they tend to focus maybe on the negatives a lot more. Whereas I at least try to focus on the positive in each situation. Obviously there's bad, but I look at, at the good and how much we've accomplished in 77 years. I think it's incredible what Israel's accomplished. Instead of saying, well, there's traffic and there's potholes and there's all this, blah, 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 blah. If you can turn it around and say, wow, like 77, that's not a lot of time in the scope of history, 77 years, a blip in history, and look what we've created. I think that's pretty cool.
And just in the last 33 years since you've been here.
Gosh, it's unbelievable.
It's like night and day.
Totally like night and day.
Yeah.
And so somebody who's coming here is already coming here for more idealistic reasons. I think that, although it's not always the case, but like we mentioned before with the products and all that kind of stuff, but they realize that there's something maybe bigger than just, if they make an extra $100 or 100 shekels, or if they're, totally unhappy in their job, or if they're not, there's something bigger, and they're part of building something. When you build something, right? If you're building an apartment, if you're building Legos, or you're building whatever, sometimes things fall, and something's not always so easy, but you're focused at the end, right? That you're here for a bigger reason. And somebody sort of grows up in it, they don't necessarily have that. And I'm not trying to take a shot at the Israelis, God forbid, right? But a lot of them will have that mentality that you mentioned. Well, oh my gosh, it's so hard and we can't make it financially. It's because they're coming at it from a completely different approach than Olim. And I think that's why it's easier for Olim. In many respects, it's easier for Olim.
Before we get to the next example, I wanted to ask you a more general question. How is the Israeli economy affected by surges of Aliyah? I mean, and we're talking about not from like poor countries where they have to, really take care of the people with welfare and such, but for people who come here with what to offer the country, how does the economy respond to that?
It's unbelievable. It's such a boost for the economy. I mean, you're getting, if we're getting 5,000 people a year coming, and they're professionals, and they're doctors, and they're high tech, and they're electricians, or they're engineers, whatever it is, instead of having to have those people come up through the ranks, the local ranks, let's just take doctors, for example, right? Instead of, there's this long process. You're getting the leading physicians in the world are coming to Israel now to live. I mean, if we just focus again on medicine, the healthcare here has the quality of healthcare has surged in those 33 years, right? There's no comparison. You literally
think it's due to the people who made Aliyah?
I think it's unbelievable. And it's allowing the government is all for it. Also, just again, the doctors, and I don't want to plug Nefesh B'Nefesh, but there's the whole thing with the health ministry and to bring quality medical care to the periphery. I mean, there was nobody ever thought about the periphery before. They were focused on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, whatever. And now, Dimona or whatever it is, the north and the south, because of these doctors and the programs they have to settle them there, and they give them bonuses and whatever. It's unbelievable. And it's just a boost when you're getting, people who come with managerial experience and creativity, and even more than, I think, they come with a passion. Right? If somebody comes with a passion, they can do anything. But if they're passionate about it, by definition, that's going to improve whatever it is they're going into. Right? That's just by definition. Plus, they're bringing creativity, and that in fact spills down. Right? That means there's more jobs because they're creating things, and they also have money. Many of them have money, and everybody who comes who has money, who doesn't have to take from the government, but puts into the economy, by definition, is helping the economy. They're consumers just like we're consumers, but if you get another, 100,000 consumers, that's fantastic for the economy.
Okay,
It's
so let's
dynamite.
Yeah, I was really curious about that. It's important because I think that people who come here really need to know that they're also helping the economy when they come here.
Without question. I mean, without question, they're helping the economy. Again, just because the more people spending more money, forget about creating and whatever, but more people spending more money is already good, is fantastic for the economy. And then everything else, the jobs that are being created and the quality of whatever, again, healthcare or whatever it is they're going into, just helps the nation by leaps and bounds.
Okay, let's go back. Young couple,
Mm-hmm.
2 young children. Both of them have university degrees, and they want to move to Israel.
Mm.
Their concerns are to buy or to rent. They don't, I don't know, it's not necessarily that they own a house in Chutz La'aretz, but rent here is also expensive, and it's not the greatest idea long term. And childcare, we said, was less expensive here, but people send their kids to school here at a much younger age than they do there. So what would you say to someone like that in that situation?
So they might be, I said them along with people who come with slightly older, like kids who were teenagers. I think those are the two trickiest age groups for people to come because they're just getting started, right? So again, on the one hand, they can do whatever they want. They can sort of reinvent themselves. On the other hand, they've got little kids to take. They have certain responsibilities, which makes it a little bit harder for them to say, you know what, I was an engineer. Well, that's a bad example, but I did whatever I did in North America, and now I'm gonna, become an artist. Right? You can't make that radical switch when you have a lot of responsibilities of little kids or kids in general. So that's a little bit trickier. They also, right, the rent, you mentioned renting, right? Obviously, if they're able to financially able to buy something after they're here for a year or two, I would not recommend anybody making Aliyah and before they come, just saying, okay, well, I'm going to live in this community, I'm going to buy in that community, and that's it. You really have to live here in a community or two for a couple of years and figure out that's where I want to be, because things here are communities in Israel are very sort of niche-y, so to speak. And if you don't fit that niche, you might not be happy. There are not so many places where like everybody lives together. It might be sad, but it just doesn't work that way.
Except for the big cities.
The big cities,
Yeah.
right? Those are the only places. The big cities are super, super expensive, and they're not always great landing spots for Olim, right? Because you want to have a sort of a community of people, support system, right? And you don't always get that support system if you're living in a big city.
Right.
That's a big issue. The other downside about, if you can't afford to buy something right away or you have to rent, this is one of the negatives in the Israeli economy and Israel in general, is that there's no really well-established long-term rental market, right? You can rent generally here for a year, maybe with an option of 2 years, and maybe you can roll the lease for another similar time period. But at some point, we've all been through it. I don't know if you've been through it. I've definitely been through it. The landlord calls, right? And he calls generally at the wrong time and says, my grandchildren, my grandson just got married and he was living in LA and he's moving back to Israel and he's going to be living in the apartment and you have 3 months. That kind of story happens all the time. And I'm speaking from experience also. It happened to us. And you can't lock yourself in for the most part to an apartment, for 10 years or 15 years. It's just, you might get lucky, but there's no kind of established system where that exists, right? So nobody wants to start, you rent for 2 years and you got to go find another rental and then you got to find another rental.
Why is that?
I don't know. That's just the way they built the system. Because everybody owns. Because the Israeli way was that Israelis love stereotypical, right? Jews also like real estate. So Israelis are Jews and they love real estate. And they like something that's tangible. They're really, really like real estate. And they all believe that you have to own, right? As soon as you get married, you've got to buy, even if you can't afford it, you've got to buy an apartment, right? And both sides are supposed to pitch in. And it's like this whole cultural thing. And nobody's really ever developed. They've tried very, very small sample size, but to sort of create a longer term rental market. And it just hasn't really taken.
It's interesting. Why not? Because so many people here rent. So many people can't afford to buy a house.
For sure. Especially now that prices have surged.
Yeah.
You have all these young couples and what have you. Even in when you get outside the big cities, a lot of people still can't afford it.
And you said also that Aliyah is great because it boosts the economy, but it also boosts the prices of housing.
It's boosting the price of housing because of fundamental flaws in the Israeli system, that there's enough supply and they haven't been building enough. And to be fair, right? Corona partly, and then the war totally has caused for sort of a shortage in supply, because people are still coming to Israel and young couples in Israel still getting married, and that part of the equation hasn't stopped, but there's not much building going on right now because there's no workers and whatever, right? So that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of projects being built, but a lot of them stopped and they're in the middle, and there's not a lot of new supply that's actually livable currently, which is actually hitting the market. Probably in 5 years from now, there might even be an oversupply, but for the time being, that's a big, big issue. But getting back to what you said about the young couple, I think the young couple really needs, like I said, they should be renting at the beginning, no matter what. Everybody should be renting, I think, for the first year or two. They also have to be flexible, like we spoke about a few times already. You don't have to live, in Rehavia in Jerusalem. You don't have to live in Buchman. There are other places that you can go, which are, I'm not going to say cheap, but cheaper. Right? And, if you want to make it work, you got to do that. I know people who moved up to Nahariya, which is beautiful, right? And there's trains, you can still get to Tel Aviv, and there are places that you can go live that also have pockets of Olim. So you're not going to be thrown in, with hardcore Israelis, right? You're going to be able to have a softer landing with people who sort of understand your mindset a little more. And it's much, much cheaper. Much, much cheaper. There's no law that says you have to live in one of those major centers, and you can do just fine, living in Afula or whatever. And it's a third of the price. It's still, the prices have moved up a lot, but it's nothing compared to what it costs here, right around your studio or where I live or whatever. And you can climb, if you're young anyway, even if you were living in Canada, if you're living in North America, in America, whatever it is, oftentimes people climb the property ladder anyway. The first house they buy is not the house they're going to raise all their kids and going to retire and die in. It doesn't work that way. And the same thing can be here. You can start off, in one of those areas that are outside the center, and slowly you gain money and you gain traction and you build equity in your place, and you can move up the ladder. And then you can move into Buchman or whatever it is you want to, in Efrat or wherever you want to live. It becomes affordable, right? Don't try, and I think this is universal. This is not just for people thinking of making Aliyah. This is for everybody who's tuning in all over the world. We live in a generation now where, you do this, you swipe, or you do this, right? You click, and everything is instant. And when you're in your mid-20s or late 20s, and you have a family, and you say, well, I grew up in a house like this, and this. You don't remember that your parents struggled at the beginning, and it took them time to get to where they are now. And you have to take a step back and realize you can't have it all by the time you're 30. Very few people have that. There's the lucky, not even 1%. There's, 99.9% of humanity, by the time they're in their late 20s, haven't achieved all their financial goals. It just doesn't happen that way. And, get into the game and trust the process, follow the book. It's not so difficult, but you will be successful. The Olim will be successful. The locals will be successful. And the person here who's living in Ottawa, who's not even come to Israel, but is tuning in because they know you from childhood, that's the same advice to them also. Just be patient, but trust the process. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And just follow the process, and you'll be fine.
I think people are afraid that they're going to have to take a major cut in their standard of living, or in some way, which I think is part of the equation anyway, when you move to Israel. Like we said before, you have to come here for a reason more than just finances, because it is going to be different no matter how you cut it, right?
For sure. I don't know anybody who comes to Israel because I'm coming to Israel because I want to be a millionaire.
Right. But there are people who will be like, I'm not moving unless I can have the same standard of living.
Right. So I think that's going to be, you talked right at the beginning about your pessimism.
My pessimism.
No, that you are pessimistic. Not pessimistic, that might not be the wrong word, but your nervousness
Yeah.
that people are going to have
Yeah.
to come here not
Yeah.
by choice, right? Right now, we're still living in a world of Aliyah by choice
Right.
for most places. And it might flip that, right? It might be
Right.
because out of need.
Right.
I think people who are in that camp that you're talking about, who just can't bend on their standard of living, you know, they're gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
They're gonna have a problem, and maybe it's not time for it's not the right time for them to come. I mean, I want everybody to come, but
Yeah.
you know, if you're gonna come here and you'll be miserable and you're complaining all the time that you don't have what you have in wherever you come from, you're not gonna make it. You're just not gonna be successful.
Right.
You have to have a complete. It's got to be a switch. It's got to be a switch.
Okay, so let's get to the third and final type of person who are, let's say, in their 60s, 70s, who are quite settled. They have investments, they have wills, they have property, they have a lot, and they want to come to Israel. And I asked you a couple of days ago if we can have a Q&A. Most of the questions came from this type of people,
Okay.
people who are already established, especially in Canada. And they asked, if you have a will already set up in Canada, do you need to make another will for Israel?
So I'm not a lawyer, but if you have Israeli assets, it behooves you probably to have an Israeli will. I've spoken to a lot of estate planners, a lot of lawyers who do this, and they'll tell you that even if you have financial assets, like if you have stocks or things like that abroad, and you have stuff in Israel, that your Israeli will pretty much, I know because this is my business, like in terms of American brokerage accounts and whatever, you can just probate your Israeli will and you're good to go. You get that letter, you get it, notarized and translated, and then all your stuff that's abroad will be freed up. If you've got property and stuff in Canada, that makes it a little more complicated. And then a lot of people say you should probably have 2 wills.
Right, so
But the wills are really
paying your bank, all your money in Canada. Like you keep your bank accounts in Canada, and then you just you open up new accounts here in Israel.
New accounts in Israel, or if let's say you buy an apartment here, that's the biggest thing that happens. Most people from North America, certainly Americans, because it's very complicated, they probably should not, in 99% of the cases, bring their money over to Israel.
Right.
They should have
So
some
that's the
money in
question.
Israel.
Yeah.
They should have some money in Israel because you're living here, right? But most of their investments, for all kinds of tax reasons, I don't want to get into the minutiae, but for a myriad of tax reasons, they should probably keep their money in the States or in Canada. Canada a little less, but still there are reasons to keep it there, certainly for Americans. But many of them come and buy property here. And once you do that, so you're going to want to have your international will there is going to be much more complicated to deal with the property here. So you're going to want to have a local Israeli will as well for that.
I wasn't necessarily going to ask you this, but because you said that your wife works with Nefesh B'Nefesh, so you know about the 10-year tax cut when you make Aliyah. How does that help people who are in that
So those people, the tax holiday relates to passive income that you get.
Can you explain what it is?
So let's say you have a rental. That's the classic thing. Let's say you have a rental where you came from before you made Aliyah, in Canada, in America, wherever it is. The rental income that you're going to get on that is not going to be taxed by Israel. If you get dividends or things from stocks, those kinds of things, I mean, you have to check with your accountant. I'm not an accountant, speak with a professional, but anything that's not active income, everything that's not basically from your job, right? That would be considered income. Anything that's passive, that you sort of clip a coupon that comes to you without you doing anything, so to speak, is considered passive income. You have a 10-year holiday by the Israelis, right? One thing people who make Aliyah need to know is that there could be, you may have, depending on what you do, you're probably going to have to file taxes in both countries, your country of origin and in Israel. The 10-year tax holiday says that on that passive income, you don't have to pay any tax in Israel, right? There could be there are times where you might have to pay taxes in both domiciles, right? In Canada, the US, and in Israel. You generally have to pay up to the highest rate in either one of those countries. But when you get the 10-year exemption, that holiday means that you don't have to pay any of that passive income is not subject to tax in Israel.
So after 10 years, you're...
Then you've got to start planning. Once you get to around year 8, you should sit down with an accountant and your financial advisor and start creating a strategy. But it's a huge perk, especially for retirees, because that could make up a huge, if they've got rental income coming in, plus their RSPs or their Social Security or whatever else, could be a big chunk of how they're planning on making it here. That could really be how they're going to consider funding their retirement in Israel. And to know that they get 10 years of that they don't have to worry about, that's a huge benefit for them. In many cases, that means you're going to be into your 80s before you have to start worrying about it. So your prime, let's say, retirement years are still going to be sort of within that window and tax-free and what have you. And that's a big, big benefit, a big, big benefit.
How do investments work? People who have investments in Chutz La'aretz when you move to Israel.
So what's important to know, I mentioned it before in terms of Americans, that Americans should for sure keep their investments in most cases, keep their investments in America, because there are all kinds of tax issues that they bring, depending on accounts and what have you. They're taxable. And when when an American invests in Israel, if they don't know what they're doing, they're subject to prohibitively high taxation by the U.S. authorities. So if you don't know what you're doing, it's better not to get into that hornet's nest. The other issue that people face is there are a lot of firms that when somebody moves to Israel or moves out of the United States, let's say, won't work with you anymore if you have a foreign address. So some people get around that by they somehow keep an American address. It's not such an easy thing to do. And obviously when the firms decide to check, they're not friars, as we say in the local vernacular, right? They're not stupid, right? And they're not going to, people say, well, we've got a credit card that goes to some address. They're smarter than that. And they know they want to see a gas bill that's in your name, and you're not going to be able to provide that for them. So that's a problem. So you may want to, some firms will allow it and let you keep your account, but something that people have to know going in is that they may be requested, they might get a letter saying that they have to move their account to another firm. The American firm will no longer want to service them. What's very important then is not, and I get this all the time, on Friday I got this from somebody, don't panic and say, oh my God, that firm won't hold my account anymore. I must bring all my money to Israel. Bad news, right? It can cost you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars by making that mistake. There are plenty of people here, right? But I'm not tooting my own horn, right? There are plenty of people here who can work with people who know the cross-border situation and can work with people, with expats who live in Israel now. It's not, there are people, you can find them. I'm one of them, but there are others, and they're also licensed and what have you. So that's another issue. You're going to want to work with somebody who's licensed in both countries. There are a lot of people, warning, flash. There are a lot of people in this business of investments who are not licensed, who are sort of flying under the radar screen in Israel. And it's really important, and I don't have to tell you, you know about this also, there's every now and then you hear about these scams where Olim or whatever get taken to the cleaners because they made some kind of an investment in something and they have no recourse because nobody was licensed, nobody was legitimate, and they lose all their money. This has happened numerous times in the past. And one of the benefits of working with somebody who's licensed is that you have recourse, right? You can go to the authorities, you can go to the regulators. There are a lot of people flying under the radar screen here. And they're targeting the Anglo community because they figure that Olim don't know. And they assume, well, if somebody's speaking to me on investments, they must be licensed because in America or in Canada or in London, they all have to have their licenses. So how can it be that somebody would dare talk to me without being licensed? And welcome to Israel. Exactly. So it's so important. And they're giving bad advice and it's illegal, right? It's actually a felony. So it's something to really, really, keep track of and know who it is that you're going to speak to. But for those people, there are people, and you can find them on the internet and speak to other people. There are people out there who can help, but you don't want to panic, right? And there's a good chance you're going to get that letter. There are a lot of people who've gotten a letter saying thank you, but no thank you. You have to move your account. Don't move it to Israel right away, right? It's going to cost you so much money, and it's going to blow apart your retirement at the end of the day. There are people you can work with, and there are plenty of solutions out there for these people.
Are you working primarily with Anglos, or do you work with Israelis too?
I would say that I work probably 70% of my client base are Anglos, mostly Americans, some Canadians, and 30% are Israelis.
What is the easiest country to make Aliyah from?
The easiest country to make Aliyah from? Wow, that's a really good question.
In terms of
Financial, I know that you were talking about it. Never. Wow, that's a good question.
Are there some that are easier?
Are there some that are easier? There probably are, but a lot of countries are sort of moving towards sort of universal global taxation and things like that, which make things a lot more difficult. People, I think, financially who live in London, I think, or who come from England, I think life is a lot easier for them than it is if they're coming from other countries.
Why? Because we're sort of in the EU?
They have other ways to deal with their money where they don't get taxed on it, and it makes life a little bit easier for them. But ultimately, there's solutions for all of these people. Like, I don't know what it's like if you make Aliyah from like Spain. I don't have much experience with that. But if you're coming from Canada, if you're coming from the US, if you're coming from Western Europe, it might not be 100% smooth, but it's not. That's not the reason not to make Aliyah. Like, there are other reasons maybe you might not want to make Aliyah, like the standard of living thing that we said. If you're not willing to bend, that's a reason not to make Aliyah, right? But there are solutions for all these people, and they're not complicated. It's not like, oh my God, I've got to start, doing trusts and this kind of stuff. It's going to cost me, $1 million to make Aliyah financially. It's not like that. It's really not so complicated. They're just things that are really specific to each country of origin. And you speak to the professionals who specialize in those specific countries, and they're professionals for everybody, for Canada, for the UK, and for France. And, there are people who work and have those we talked about niches, right? Those niches for each sort of jurisdiction of where people are coming from. And there are plenty of solutions, and they're easy solutions.
I have a question that's related, but not related. And when I met you, I came to you for help with budgeting. Are you still doing that now?
So I still do that a little bit. It's not.
It was
I'm from a lot of
work, like you.
So I still do that for that. Yeah. And I'm on the board of an organization that does that, and I do it from time to time when people call me.
Why do you think they don't teach budgeting in school?
In any school. That's not Israel. I don't know. Maybe because they're the people who would teach it or not.
Like
they're also in debt. I don't know.
When I was in school, we learned cooking and sewing. Those were our extra chugim. And I always said, like, it would be so practical to teach kids how to manage their money, because a lot of people grow up and they have no idea what they're doing, and they get into huge debt at a very, very early age, like I did. And it would really, solve that whole issue. So I wanted to ask you, have you ever had any of yourself, any financial issues? Did you ever have any trouble?
So I thankfully have been pretty much okay. I think I've been pretty much okay. Obviously, when I came here at the beginning, I didn't have very much, right? I wasn't living the good life.
Right.
But I didn't get into debt or any of those kinds of things. There was one ray of hope. We have, thank God, I have 5 children. And my oldest son, my second child in high school, had a course for a year. They actually brought in and they taught them like the basics of personal finance. And
that's amazing.
It was amazing. I'm not going to criticize it because they did it, right? It could have been a lot better. It was very superficial. But they taught them the basics of debit cards and how to use a bank, which is fantastic. If anything should be put into the curriculum, I'm all with you, right? For sure, it should go in. It's so needed, and it would be so important for people to start off on their right foot in life instead of their left foot, and they won't be in debt and whatever. So my kids, when kids in Israel, when they get to a certain age, they can finally open up a bank account, and everything's free, right? And the banks give them everything for free, and then before you know it, they start. Well, we'll give you a credit card, right? Not a debit card. They'll give you a credit card, and the first year is free. And what do the kids know? It's like, well, hey, great, I can start buying. I don't have to have the money, and off they go into that spiral, that downward spiral. And I think everybody's responsible. Like the banks certainly, what are they don't have your best interests at heart. That's for sure. They have their best interests at heart. When they want you to be an overdraft, and they want you to, to take credit, and they want you to pay 20% on your loans and on your overdraft, all this kind of, that's their business. So they're not going to be the ones who change the curriculum. And it's just never been on really the radar screen. I've never had it with any of my other kids. Just that one had it.
Have you ever sat down with your kids and had the discussion?
I try to. Sometimes I hope that first of all, I have them, they're supposed to watch my podcast, but I know that they don't. So I go into how do I know that? Because sometimes they grab their phones when they're on them. I like wrestle it away from them.
Really?
And I go into YouTube, right, or whatever. And I know that they haven't I said, how come you haven't watched it in 4 months?
Is there an exam after each one?
So I hope that they hear it enough that it sort of seeps through, and that they don't go, oh my God, my father, it's embarrassing, right? I'm not going to live. You have to do the opposite of our parents, right? We have to do the opposite. So I hope that that's not a situation, but they tend to be pretty good, right? Everybody makes mistakes, even though, I remember my first big purchase. And I was thinking about your question, my first big purchase and how I felt after I make that purchase. I just got my driver's license and I was driving, and there was a sale on golf clubs. Now, I used to work. I delivered papers and I had summer jobs, and I was pretty industrious.
This was here or there?
This is there.
Mm-hmm.
I was 16, and there was a sale at like some golf store, and I had to drive like 45 minutes, and it was like $69.99, which today is like, I don't know, $500,
Yeah.
right? It was $69.99, and I was gonna I used to play golf. I would play golf every week when I was a teenager, and I was like, I got to go. I didn't tell my parents. It was my money, and I could drive. I could do whatever I want. So I went out there, and it was sort of for me an impulsive decision. I saw the ad in the paper, right? It was not internet. There was nothing. I saw the ad in the newspaper, and I drove out there. And I bought this set, and I came home, and I was like, what the heck did I just do? It was great. It wasn't the end of the world, right? And I played golf, and I used the clubs for 8 years or whatever until I came to Israel. So it was all okay. But that was the first time I felt guilt about finance. I never felt that before. And I haven't really had that feeling so much. Occasionally, you sort of get that that uneasy thing, like, maybe that wasn't such a smart thing to do.
Do you think the guilt comes when you feel like you maybe shouldn't have bought it?
I thought the guilt, because I had the money for it, but then that was like a lot of money then. And how much money did I have? And it's like, wow, spending like, I don't know, 10% of my whole net worth on a set of golf clubs. At some point, it wasn't like as intellectual, but at some point when I got home, I was like, that wasn't maybe the smartest decision of my, it wasn't the smartest thing to do. And I realized why, for a myriad of reasons, why maybe I should have thought about it a little more. And so I sort of got that. And with kids, I find now that it's easy for me to pontificate when I'm speaking with other people in my office, right? I can be the one who's, I can be the Pope. I can say it as it is, because what do I care, right? I can say it as, but your question asking me about my own thing. And then with the kids, I'm always torn. And I try to sometimes now, when I have meetings with people, to relate how I would deal with my kids. Because on the one hand, as we're protective of our kids, right? On the other hand, we need our kids to make mistakes. That's the only way they're going to ever learn. Right. So when you see your kid making a stupid financial decision, what do? I don't have a good answer to that. I mean, I could, you ask me on Sunday and I'll say one thing, and you ask me on Monday, I'm going to give you a different answer. I don't know the answer to that. I was speaking with a client last week, and we were just talking about their finances, what their goals are with their money. They had a lot of money, and they made Aliya about 10 years ago, but they were, thank God, well off. And they didn't need any of their money. They wanted it to grow. I said, what's your goal for the money? And I thought they were going to not surprise me. I figured they were at some point that they were going to speak about philanthropy with some of the money, but they go, no, obviously we want as much money as possible to leave as much as possible to our children. And when they said that, that struck me as not great, right? Because there's a lot of money, right? It's one thing if you're going to leave your kids a couple $100,000 or whatever, based on projections, they could be leaching each kid $10 to $12 million
My God.
right? So do you want to do that?
Anyone?
Right? But do you want, philosophically, right? Do you want to do that? It works all the way down. It doesn't have to be for the high net worth, right? Do you want to do that? Like, what are you doing for your children by doing that? Right? On the one hand, it's great. And we all would like to inherit $10 million, but would we? Would we want to inherit $10 million? Right? Or would we want to earn the $10 million? Should they earn the $10 million? Like, there's a lot that goes into those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, I love the philosophical nature of, or the moral, whatever the word is, a philosopher. I'm not Aristotle, right? But understanding how these things work and their implications on the next generation.
Right.
And how did those things jive with sort of values that I personally, and maybe are universal, but at least I personally hold dear, which is like hard work and doing it yourself, because I did that, right? So just because I did that, maybe should my kids do that, right? Maybe they shouldn't clean toilets, right? I think that's what made me, right? That made me who I am, because I clean toilets. But maybe if I didn't have to clean toilets, I would still be a decent person and whatever. There's a lot of struggle that goes on with it, and it's the same struggles we have as parents in any facet, with math. Should we give them the answers, or for English, right? Should we write the papers for them, or should we edit the papers, or should they hand in the papers? A kid who grew up here, who's in the English class, the English for English speaker class, but didn't make Aliya 2 years ago and didn't go through, English in abroad, and learned English here and speaks English, a little bit better than the Israelis, but not much better. But because their parents happen to be English speakers, they're put into this class. Should we correct their spelling and we do this, or should they hand it in and get a lot of red circles on it and learn the hard way?
Yeah.
We struggle with this in life all the time.
They've done a lot of studies on kids who have trust funds, and how successful they are once they get the money. And they say that, like, the people who have the money handed to them, they're the most miserable people ever. And the people who really appreciate the money are the ones who've really had to work hard for it. It's like that in almost everything in life.
Everything in life.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that. I think that people have to, maybe it's coming up, right? Like, I'm coming at it, or we're coming at it I'm coming at it certainly from a certain approach. It was for coming from a family, didn't have so much, thank God we ate and we had whatever we needed. Right? But we weren't going to be getting $10 million a person, right? And I didn't even, whoever thought of that? Like, it didn't matter. We were happy, and we were always ingrained with, you have to work hard and sort of you do it yourself kind of thing. And nobody's going to give you anything, so you do it yourself. And then when faced with that, all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody else who might come from a completely different culture of money. Like, culture of money of in itself is fascinating, because everybody has their own sort of family culture of money and influences from outside the family, societal concepts of money. And, you don't want to impose your values on somebody else's system, especially when you're trying to give them advice.
Right.
So it's very, very, very difficult.
Yeah,
it's very, very difficult.
Because you also have to get into their head.
You have to get into their head.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you're trying to give them good advice, you have to extricate yourself and your philosophy from the equation and put yourself into their shoes.
Right.
And if they think that's the greatest thing ever, to give their kids everything, so their kids don't, at the age of 30, never have to do anything. So if that's what they think, then you can't, and it's not your, I don't know that it's your responsibility to do that, because who says that I'm right? At the end of the day, I don't know that I'm right. I mean, it's just the values that I have.
How has the war affected the economy?
So there were a lot of projections that the war was going to be disastrous for the economy in Israel. And people would come up to me and they say, oh my God, we're terrified about the economic concept of the war. And I said, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I said, just relax. Everything's going to be just fine. And we see...
Why do you say that?
Because what I felt was that you weren't going to have, right, we had that initial onslaught, right? And everybody went into Miluim, and right, there weren't very many people home, and everybody was fighting who could fight. And everybody was in shock, right? So nobody was, forget about, taking a vacation abroad. Nobody was going to buy a couch, right? Nobody had the mindset to spend money, which might have been a good thing, but we'll leave that. But that's not great for the economy. But I said, what I thought was that at some point that's going to stop. And as soon as I saw that they were going to start letting some of the Miluimnikim out, so all that was going to do to the economy was to postpone the demand. You're going to have pent-up demand in the economy. At some point, the people who need the couch are going to buy the couch. Okay, so we might have a couple of months where, everybody's in shock, but Israelis are so resilient. And you can't, what they say about the Israelis, I'm not sure that most people are not resilient. I think humanity is pretty resilient. Human beings are resilient. After 9/11 also, and, okay, after the initial shock, life goes on. It's changed, but you still get up in the morning and you still have to do. People who were able to go to work, right? They kept going to work. People who were fighting, but people still had to feed their families and they were still buying stuff. So my gut told me that at some point, it was the same thing that happened during Corona, right? At the beginning of Corona, everybody stopped sending, everybody stopped, right? Life stopped. But all it did for people who needed to buy a new computer, I'm not talking about somebody who had to go to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee. That was lost. That cup of coffee was lost because it wasn't that after things opened up, people were going to drink 50 cups of coffee to make up all the coffee they didn't drink. But somebody who needed to buy a new computer, okay, so they wait a couple of months and then they'll buy the new computer, right? That's something they're going to do anyway. And that's what my philosophy was with the war. It's just going to be a delay, but at some point when things open up and people start coming back home, and they become almost, it's not nice to say, but anesthetized to what's going on because it's been a year and a half, right? But that's natural, right? That's natural, and life goes on, right? We can't just, we cry and we're in pain and we pray for the hostages and we pray for speedy recoveries for all the soldiers who were injured, and we pray for a victory in the war, right? But we also go on with our lives, right? And there's no choice. We have to go on with our lives, and by definition, by doing that, the economy will be fine. And the fact is, we spoke about earlier that just how much has been accomplished here in 77 years. That's the proof in the pudding, right? How resilient the economy is. That the economy is fine. Okay, is it perfect? No. Could be better? Yes. Are there things to change? Yes. But are we okay right now? Is anybody talking about economic collapse? No. I mean, things are great.
The other countries in the world, they're also not doing so hot.
We're doing just fine. I mean, we're really, really doing great. And at some point when this ends, we're going to be doing super great. Like, I am so bullish on Israel. Now I'm rah-rah. I said at the beginning, I didn't come up from Aliya, but I'm rah-rah Israel. I think Israel is an unbelievable place. And I focus on abroad, but people ask me, well, should I invest in Israel? I'm like, totally you should invest in Israel because you just see it, right? I drove to your studio and, they joke the national bird is the crane, the construction crane, right? The national bird of Israel, right? Everywhere you go, and right, those we spoke about, those projects are being stalled because there are not enough workers, but at some point that's going to work itself out, right? The war will end at some point. And, people are coming and there's just there's going to be so much creativity. We've seen waves of like technology. Israel's like obviously a high-tech leader, but it's come in waves. And a lot of that comes because of military technology after a conflict or after a war, which then works its way into sort of consumer application. And we've got all this crazy technology, right, from that's coming out of this war, crazy technology, which is going to work its way. That's sort of the next wave of Israeli like high-tech dominance. And I don't know. I just think that, and they're building, and if you go outside, you would not know, other than the fact that 2 hours ago I had to run into my sealed room because there was a siren in Jerusalem. But other than that, you would not know what's going on. I mean, there's the hustle and bustle, and there's the building, and there's the creativity. All that stuff is still going on.
Are most of your clients Jewish?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Because I was going to ask you if you had any anti-Semitism in your work.
I don't feel any. I'm lucky. Thank God I don't feel any anti-Semitism.
Yeah, you're not exposed to that at all.
No. And the people I work with in the States are like, they're really, really sort of proud, and they're like, they donate to the FIDF. And I had a nephew who was killed.
I know. I wanted to
on October the 7th for Kibbutz Cholit. And the firm in the States made a big, big donation to Friends of the IDF in his honor. So I don't see anything.
Were you close to your nephew? His name was Chaim, right?
Chaim. Yeah. He spent some time getting his doctorate in Seattle. And we went to visit my father. He was very, very good to my father of blessed memory. He was very, very good.
Well, your father also passed away.
My father passed away a year ago, a little more than a year ago. Yeah. And he was very good to him. And we went to visit one summer, and Chaim was there. And we really had it was beautiful. We had meals together, and we had a real the kids. We had a real connection. So we didn't have that much to do with him because he was older than he was much older than my children, right? It's my oldest brother who's 11 years older than me. So
how old was Chaim when he was
32?
Oh, wow.
So, but we had that always remember that, that interaction with him. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about how he was held?
He was he died a hero, literally died a hero. The terrorists came into his home, and there was another woman there, and he basically blocked. They went into a cupboard or whatever like that, and he basically took the bullets. They started shooting. They took the bullets, and they opened the door, and he was dead. And they took out the other woman. They took her. The Hamas terrorists took her, and they handed her from the neighbor who they'd killed 2 babies, literally a baby, and then like a 4-year-old or whatever. And they handed it to this lady who my nephew had saved, and they started walking with her into Gaza. They walked her into Gaza, and it's a long story, but then for whatever reason, they left her, and she started walking back into Israel to the kibbutz, and you have all these terrorists, she's swimming upstream, right? All these terrorists are coming at her, some of them with hostages, some with the bodies, whatever it was. And she's holding the baby, and she's got the little kid holding on to her leg or whatever like that, he was, obviously petrified and hungry and whatever. And she made it back to the kibbutz. And so he was basically, it's a real dramatic story, but he was responsible basically for he saved her life, who in turn saved, the lives of these 2 children. And it's remarkable.
That's a remarkable story. Mm-hmm. How did that whole thing affect you?
How did it affect me? Obviously, at the beginning, it was tragic. I felt tragic for my brother, and it was horrible. The whole thing, we were in shock. We're in shock.
Where's your brother? Where does he live?
He lives in Petah Tikva.
Uh-huh.
And I'll never forget the call when we found out that something had happened. We didn't know what had happened, but we knew that there was no contact. And a sister of mine called me. And I remember running. My wife was on a Zoom, and they said, turn off the Zoom for a second to tell you what happens. I told her. And then I came out. My in-laws happened to be over, and the kids. And I grabbed, I went to the bookcase, and I grabbed a bunch of books of Psalms, and I handed it out to everybody. I said, we have to start saying. I told them what happened. I said, we didn't really know much. We didn't know that he was, at that time, they thought he was abducted and brought into Gaza. They didn't know until the morning that they found him still in the kibbutz, and he was killed. So that was just completely crazy, right? Who can you can never dream of something like that, and it was it was difficult. And then you had to wait, until they identified the body, and the burial was only, 5 days later. It's I was an uncle. I was thinking all the time about my brother, right? My, my sister-in-law, whatever, what they had to go through, how terrible that whole situation is. It's tragic. It's just, it's horrible.
Do you have kids fighting in the war?
I had a son, who's in the war. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How does that make you feel?
He's out now, so it makes us feel a lot better. Not easy. It was not an easy service of his. They extended his service, and and he did his time in Gaza also, and one of his good friends was killed, who was on a mission, but they were together, and they went to school together, and so it was not simple. Another friend was shot. Not easy. And we've obviously had neighbors and close friends who've lost children and stuff. It's not been an easy time.
I don't know about you, but it's after all of this has been going on, you'd think it would make you want to leave. But it actually, for me, makes me feel closer to the country. I feel like we're connected in blood,
For sure. Look, we spoke about when you make Aliyah, you want to make Aliyah you have to have a reason, not to get rich, right? You have to have a real reason. And generally, it's a greater reason. And, it's unfortunate. Unfortunate's a little lousy word, right? But when you have that bigger reason, sometimes it doesn't go right.
It comes
When you
from
want
the
something that you
person.
really, really want, it's not, it's not a straight line. It's a zigzag, and there are ups and downs until you get to that goal. It's like anything, right? And it makes you appreciate it. The loss makes you appreciate it more and more, I think. And that's like you said, you just get deeper, more connected.
Your roots get deeper and
You get deeper and
to
deeper and
the
deeper. Yeah. It's fascinating, but that's just the way that it works.
I want to ask you one final question.
Okay.
What's your favorite part of living in Israel?
So I'm going to give you two answers.
Okay.
My sort of deeper favorite part is what I consider my success, because I'm not proud of a lot of things. I'm not emotional, but I am proud about like one thing, and that's that I came here as a single with nothing, and thank God, like, I'm married with a great wife, and I've got 5 beautiful children, and I started my own business in Israel, right, in a foreign language with all the bureaucracy, and thank God, like, I'm able to put food on the table and provide. And to me, that's like success. I've done some triathlons, I've done some marathons.
Yeah, you're an athlete.
That's not success, right? For me, that's like, if I had to write my epitaph or whatever at the end, that would be my success. My real favorite thing is the shuk on Friday.
Yeah.
We go to the shuk. I've been going to shuk on Friday for decades.
Really?
And I don't miss very many. And I like the shuk anyway. And the shuk reminds me, there's a market in Seattle where they throw fish. It was in movies, the whole thing. It sort of reminds me of that. That's probably why I got into the shuk at the beginning. But there's something about on Friday special where everybody, like tens of thousands of people, are converging on one place to buy food and whatever, not also entertainment, but to buy things for the Sabbath,
right,
or for the weekend.
Right.
And that sort of, to me, it's not messianic or it's anything, but that's sort of, why I'm here. And to see so many Jews coming from Seattle, like,
right,
my kids make fun of me when we go to the same market in Seattle and I would see somebody who was Jewish. I would like walk by and I would say something, like a code, because I would get so excited. Because when you come from like some outlying place and there are not a lot of Jews, when you see a Jew, it's like exciting. It really is exciting. Or you're hiking in some mountain and you hear Hebrew. It's like, wow. And then you go up to them, you start talking, right? It's like so exciting. And here you have thousands and thousands of people converging on one place for the same reason. I don't know. To me, that's why I'm here. I don't know.
Yeah. I am like crying a little bit.
Don't do that.
Yeah. It's emotional. No, it's like we really appreciate these things, the beautiful things about living here. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to promote? If people are interested in learning more about finance and investing in Israel, how do they get in touch with you?
So they can touch me. I've got a website. They can pretty much find me, right? Aaron Katsman with an SKTSMAN. Aaron Katsman. They can just Google it. I've got a website, aaronkatsman.com. I've got a YouTube channel, LinkedIn. I'm pretty far out. You'll be able to you'll just Google me and you'll find me. But I'd be happy. You don't have to invest with me, but if you're thinking about making Aliyah, I do a lot of people send me emails and I'll jump on a Zoom for 20 minutes to help. Anybody wants to make Aliyah, they get free counseling. I'd be happy to help. I really like.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for coming.
A lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, for clearing up things for people, and I wish you so much success in the future. Thanks for having me, Aaron. Thank you everyone for listening and watching.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Dayna Show. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the podcast, like and share with your friends on social media, and rate us 5 stars. Don't forget to tune in next week, and we'll see you then.